Welcome to Conflict and Genre. A genre is a category in which a book falls into. There are several different genres you're probably familiar with. There's horror, mystery, science fiction, fantasy, realistic fiction, historical fiction. You've probably heard of some of these. All genres have certain characteristics that define them. In fact, some of them become very cliché. Use the next slide to write down the different characteristics of all the genres we mentioned. A horror genre might have creepy settings, scary storylines, and untrustworthy characters. You might have a cemetery, you might have an evil killer or kidnapper on the loose. It might be gory. A mystery has an unsolvable crime where there might be a detective, magnifying glasses, and, of course, the classic red herring. An example of a mystery genre might be Sherlock Holmes. Fantasy involves things that are out of this world, things that might not normally happen. Talking animals, dragons, spells, magic, other worlds that exist at the same time as the real one. A fantasy story might have a dragon in it. Realistic fiction is a story that could happen. Everything in it is very real, including the setting, the characters, and the plot. However, it's just made up. Historical fiction involves real historical figures, events, battles, things like that. However, the actual story itself and the series of events that happen within the plot can be made up, or usually are made up, or embellished. And sometimes there's additional characters that are also completely made up and weren't actually in existence in history. An example of a historical fiction book might be one that takes place during a war or features soldiers from a real battle. Science fiction typically takes place in the future. Perhaps science fiction and dystopian worlds kind of merge together. There's usually aliens, vast new technologies, outer space, maybe robots, maybe computer viruses. Science fiction typically has robots, and the robots can either be your friend or an enemy.
I am an evil monster. I will destroy you.
A conflict is the problem in the story. There are several different types of conflict. The central conflict might be man versus man. This is your typical fight between good guy, bad guy, or maybe it's just two sports teams, or maybe you're playing a game of chess against an opponent. Then there's man versus self. This is an example of internal conflict. This is when the problem is on the inside, like if you have an ethical or moral dilemma. You're trying to decide whether or not you should turn in your friend for cheating on the test. You don't want to get in trouble. You don't think it's right that they cheated, but you don't want your friend to be mad at you. An example of man versus nature might be if there is a volcano, a natural disaster, or a wild animal that's attacking you. Man versus supernatural might be if the main character is put under a spell, is cursed, or has to face some sort of supernatural force, like a ghost. By the way, you're late again. Man versus technology typically takes place in the sci-fi genre because sci-fi is indicative of having a lot of new technologies, especially ones that go awry. So, man versus technology might be robots are attacking, the computer virus is taking over the world, a piece of technology won't work, like if you're on an airplane and the airplane is crashing and you're trying to figure out how to operate it in order to survive. Man versus society might be if the character was framed and everyone around them thinks they're guilty, including the police, their relatives, their friends, and the community. And therefore, they have to prove their innocence to everyone around them. Now that we reviewed types of genre and types of conflict. I want you to pick one genre and one conflict and write a story using that specific conflict as your central conflict with the elements of that genre within your story. Use the next slide to pick which genre and which conflict you wish to use.
Yay! Did we have fun learning today?